Let's get to the latest on the Israel-Hamas war, and for that, we're joined by UCI Visiting Assistant Professor and Israel Institute Fellow Dr. Alon Burstein. As always, Alon, it's good to see you. Let's get straight into the news. A lot to cover today. There was an opinion piece today in the Jewish News Syndicate called Sinwar's Apparent Betrayal of Iran, Hezbollah, and even Hamas, saying the once powerful Islamic Emirate in Gaza, established in 2007, has now crumbled. The piece discusses something that you and I have talked about several times, which is that the specific timing of the October 7th attack was not communicated to Hamas's partners like Iran or Hezbollah before the attack happened. How has this lack of communication strained the relationship between Hamas and other Iran-backed groups, Alon?
It's always good to see you. I think that we have to separate several things. The internal leadership of Hamas has historically always been subordinate to the external leadership. And this is due to a variety of things. This is since the assassination of Ahmed Yassin back in the Second Intifada, done over 20 years ago. And this is largely due to safety. Like the overarching leader of Hamas, before it was Khalid Masha, now Ismail Haniyeh, has always been external. And the internal leadership was seen as subordinate to it, largely out of safety, to not be assassinated by Israel. What the war did is really change that. It gave the internal leadership this elevated position, but in turn, it led to this schism inside Hamas. I'm not even talking yet about the relationship with Iran and Hezbollah. It's this schism inside Hamas, where on the one hand, for example, one of the reasons that negotiations are having such a hard time is that Ismail Haniyeh and Khalid Mashal and Musa Abu Marzouk, these are the top-ranking officials of Hamas, the official leaders of Hamas, reside in Qatar. They're the ones who are negotiating, but they actually cannot deliver on any promises unless the internal leadership accepts them, which is different than in the past. And that's one of the reasons that even when we've seen them say, maybe we need to hear back from the leadership in Gaza, because we can say, yes, we agree to a truce, the leadership may not listen to us. Now, at the same time, that is what really happened with the difference in how Hezbollah and Iran perceived Hamas, at least the external leadership, and the internal leadership. They thought that they were all aligned. There's a close relationship between Hezbollah and Hamas in Lebanon. There's a close relationship between Ismail Haniyeh and the leaders in Iran. And they all thought that they were aligned on the same page. They were all planning some sort of big attack at some point. Hezbollah has also been training the Redwan force for this at some point. They all feel like Hamas somewhat went rogue. Like Hamas in the Gaza Strip went and did not consult them before carrying out this major act. I think that likely this was just due to a miscalculation. Likely Yahya Sinwar thought that everyone is aligned enough and will be happy enough, so to speak, that when this is launched, that therefore, after October 7th, yes, we did not communicate to you, but obviously everyone is happy with this, everyone's going to join. According to reports, half an hour before the attack was launched, the leadership in the Gaza Strip communicated to the leadership in Lebanon, this is about to be launched today. Go tell Hezbollah they should launch their war. And Hezbollah said, we don't take orders from you. We're supposed to coordinate this. And that was like the big mistake in the estimates that Yahya Sinwar made about how the war is going to develop and how the entire region is going to be happy. Everyone was quite, not exactly disapproving, but more just surprised and somewhat disappointed. I think some people felt like they were, left out of the loop, and they didn't want to be, and that's where things went wrong.
Why, and as the months have gone by, have we gotten any more clarity about why Hamas kept this a secret? Is it just simply because they wanted that element of surprise?
Largely, yes. Israel's intelligence, right, was prior to October 7th, it was world famous, right? That Israel knows anything and everything about everything that's going on. Israel's carrying out assassinations everywhere in the Middle East and possibly in the world. Today it targeted a car deep in Lebanon, killing a Hamas operative. It targeted operatives in Rafah. Now, if you're able to know, deep in Lebanon, a country you're not actively engaging or occupying, who is traveling in what car, how to assassinate them from the sky, that means you know everything that's going on the ground. The fact that Israel knew seemingly nothing about October 7th tells us about the level of secrecy that was going on. According to a report that was, I believe, in the New York Times, several weeks after October 7th, they carried out an investigation and said that very, very likely the vast majority of attackers on October 7th did not know that they were preparing for this attack today. They were awoken at 4 a.m., told, go pray, go shave. These are ritualistic things you do before going to battle. Go carry out your morning routines. But they had done that hundreds of times already. They thought that it was a training exercise. They thought, and so did Israel when they first saw this happening. They thought, okay, Hamas is carrying out another one of their performative training exercises. And only half an hour to an hour prior to the invasion, where most of the fighters said, no, today is the day. That is one of the reasons that there's a lot of news that sort of circulates when Israel carries out, at least now an attempted assassination of Marwan Issa. Maybe we'll talk about that later. When people, like high-profile people, the reasons that Yahya Sinwar and Muhammad Def are seen in this sort of elevated position is because very few people actually planned this. A lot of people trained, a lot of people participated, but very few people were actually involved in orchestrating how October 7th was carried out for the need for secrecy, for the need to make sure that Israeli intelligence that does have operatives and collaboratives everywhere in the Middle East and certainly within Gaza Strip would not know about it.
I want to ask about that strike that happened in Lebanon that you mentioned. This is from the IDF showing them taking out that Hamas terrorist in Lebanon who they say is responsible for advancing Hamas's international activity and terrorist attacks against Jewish and Israeli targets. Alon, a Hamas terrorist in Lebanon, is it unusual for a Hamas terrorist to be in Lebanon? I think we often associate Hezbollah with Lebanon.
So Hezbollah is certainly by far the strongest non-state actor in Lebanon. One of the things that Hamas did, starting basically in 2013, is start to develop a Lebanese front, a Lebanese contingency, seemingly for this day, seemingly in order to, when a war is launched, to be able to have operatives from all sides carrying out this multi-front war. That was the vision of Salah al-Arouri, who was a very, very top-ranking figure in in Hamas, who was also assassinated in Lebanon. So he's the one who wanted to develop this vision, and Hamas has a lot of operations in Lebanon for several reasons. One is, like I said, this strategic idea, this strategic element of like, you will be able to fire missiles from there, you'll be able to maybe carry out cross-border insurgencies from there. So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect is logistically. Lebanon is, as a result of a lot of different conflicts over the years, a very weak central government right now. And in turn, Hamas operates relatively freely there. There's no ability for the Lebanese government to crack down on Hamas even if it wanted to. And that's a lot easier for Hamas to operate there than it was in Syria for a long time, than it is in Jordan. So to have a base of operations that surrounds Israel allows them to come in close contact with Iran to negotiate and actually learn from each other with Hezbollah, and at the same time not really be hunted or persecuted. Lebanon is very convenient. The fact that Israel carried out this assassination in Lebanon tells us several things. First of all, Israel has been stepping up its assassinations in Syria and in Lebanon already in the last 4 to 6 weeks. Israel seemingly made a strategic decision to say it's not going to give immunity to these different high-profile leaders and activists in these different countries. If you're part of the war, you're part of the war, you're fair game, you're fair target. And that's one of the things that has led a lot of Iranian Revolutionary Guards to start evacuating from Syria. So that shows us that this policy is ongoing. It also is Israel trying to send a signal saying we can get to anyone in Lebanon. This attack was not carried out near the border. It was not carried out against an operative that was about to fire rockets. This is saying anyone who is part of the terror infrastructure that Israel is fighting is on our radar. FYI, be forewarned. This is part of the escalation between Israel and Hezbollah that has been in the last several days. And that's Israel just sending this signal, in addition to taking out a very strategic target as far as it's concerned.
What struck me about that footage was the precise nature of that strike, only taking out that one vehicle. I want to get to another post by the IDF. The Israeli military said today that it plans to direct a significant, and you know what, I actually stepped ahead of myself here. We're talking about this tweet from the IDF instead alone. So this tweet from the IDF showing them take out a commander in Hamas's operations unit, this one in Gaza. This was specifically carried out in the area of Rafah, the IDF says. Among other terrorist activities, this particular person was involved in taking control of humanitarian aid and distributing it to Hamas operatives. What do we know about how the aid is being distributed in Gaza alone? Has Hamas been benefiting from the aid?
This has been a major source of controversy in their last several weeks. I'll give a shout out to myself, and I'll say, if anyone's interested, on my YouTube channel, 2 days ago, I put out a clip that explains what has happened in the last several weeks to create this catastrophe. But basically what has happened is as a result of several factors that came together, and I can't go into all of them now, but it involved protests in Israel, and it involved the Hamas police in Rafah disintegrating, and it involved UNRWA and its funding that was collapsing. The amount of aid that entered the Gaza Strip in the last 4 to 6 weeks really diminished. It diminished from something like 258 trucks per day to an average of 60 to 78 trucks per day. And as a result, as there's less food coming in, people get more hungry, and also the Hamas fighters, are also suffering of shortages of aid. All this contributes to the fact that aid has been looted quite extensively, and Hamas is by far the strongest body in the Gaza Strip on the Palestinian side. So certainly Hamas has looted a lot of the aid and has managed to confiscate it and direct it towards its fighting units and its leaders that are in the tunnels. That said, that is not the only or even main source of the humanitarian catastrophe, just one of the factors that are coming in. An interesting strategy that the United States has been pressuring Israel to adopt in order to try to combat this, and today the IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari actually said that Israel is going to adopt this, is instead of trying to, as a result of this, limit the amount of aid, try to do the opposite. Flood Gaza Strip with aid. This is the words of the United States, and today the IDF spokesperson said the same thing. The IDF is going to flood the Gaza Strip with aid in order to not make it so scarce, so that there will be less looting, and so that it can be less something that Palestinian civilians are maybe joining Hamas in order to get food or trying to fight Hamas or things like that. Instead, take the risk that Hamas will benefit some of this because they're benefiting anyway, but trying to help the civilian population and also give Israel more diplomatic leeway. So that's part of the tension, at least, with regards to humanitarian aid and where it's going.
Let's keep in Gaza, and let's keep with the humanitarian situation there. The Israeli military said today that it plans to direct a significant portion of the 1.4 million displaced Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip's southernmost town of Rafah toward, quote, humanitarian islands in the center of the territory ahead of its planned offensive in the area. The AP says that Hamas maintains 4 battalions in Rafah that it wants to destroy. Alone, maybe we don't know the answer to this one yet, but do we know what a humanitarian island is yet?
No, we do not. Essentially, what I at least took from the message of the IDF is an attempt to answer, what are you going to do with the 1.4 million civilians? And the IDF is at least saying for now, there's not going to be one area in which we evacuate 1 million people. It's not going to be, okay, 1 million people now go to Han Yunis after the IDF has just finished in Han Yunis and almost like switch positions with the IDF. It's also not going to be, okay, 1.2 million people now make your way all the way back up north, which large amounts of the infrastructure are completely destroyed, make your way up there. Instead, the idea of creating humanitarian islands tells us several things. One, that Israel is going to designate several smaller places, smaller pockets, and going to try to disperse the population there, not one concentrated area. But more than that, it also tells us that Israel is going to try to manage the situation. Instead of just doing what it's done until now, which was evacuate all the civilians from the northern parts of the Gaza Strip and say, go down south, go to Han Yunis, Rafah, and the Mawasi Center, and then from Han Yunis, go to the Mawasi Center. Instead, they're saying, what we're going to do is develop these pockets, and within these pockets, we're going to develop temporary housing. There's going to be designated places where we divert humanitarian aid, water, field hospitals. All this was part of the IDF message. One of the things they're trying to say in this is instead of just diverting people to now another part of the strip, the IDF is going to manage this much more. It's going to tell people where to go, disperse them more effectively, and set up in these islands almost like havens with humanitarian aid for people as opposed to just diverting them to somewhere else. And one of the reasons is there aren't that many more places in the Gaza Strip that the IDF is not either operating or that the infrastructure has been completely destroyed. So that's the IDF trying to say this is at least how we're trying to develop this mechanism. He did not give any information as to when this will happen, who's going to pay for it, or how long it's going to take. So that remains to be seen.
If Israel eventually evacuates all these people, then destroys those 4 battalions, that means that they no longer have a battalion problem, but they still have a terrorist problem, don't they? They still haven't tracked down Yahya Sinwar like we were discussing. What kind of discussions are they having about the long-term terrorist problem in Gaza? Are they even having that conversation yet?
That's the better question. Your final question, is this even being discussed? And, I want to hope and assume that the people in leadership positions are discussing it, but it's at least not being made public. And more than that, according to at least the United States, it's not something that's being discussed effectively with the United States. There's a lot of concern. in the Biden administration, what is the actual plan? Let's say you invade Rafah and you manage to take out those 4 battalions. What then? Right? According to Israel's official plan that Prime Minister Netanyahu put out, which the whole thing is a page and a half, so it's not exactly a detailed plan for governance, Israel is going to maintain security control of the Gaza Strip. What does that mean? The Gaza Strip is one of the most heavily armed places. There's weaponry and guns everywhere. According to U.S. intelligence, it will take Israel over a year to just clear out the different rocket launching arrays that Hamas has developed throughout the entire Gaza Strip. That does not include the tunnels. That does not include returning the hostages. That does not include the fact that, again, there's more. I saw some estimate that there are like 30%, for the amount of population, there's like 1 gun for every 3 people in the Gaza Strip. So how do you contain that? How do you control that in an area that you're now being seen as an occupier as you start taking security control? Israel doesn't seem to have a formulated plan. One of the reasons is the tension within Israel's government, right? There's right-wing elements that are saying, well, the plan should be that Israel should redevelop its settlements there and go back to an active occupation. Other elements saying absolutely not, in the United States saying absolutely not, you're not going to do that with our support. So that's one of the reasons that Israel is seemingly avoiding talking about this. But yeah, even the latest threat assessment report from the U.S. intelligence said that Israel is going to deal with armed forces in the Gaza Strip for at least the next several years to come. There's no illusion that this is going to be over after those battalions are taken out.
Why is there such a big deal made about these battalions? What are they? Are they command hubs for Hamas, basically?
Essentially, the reason that these battalions are important, and there's also some battalions in the Deir al-Balah areas in the central parts of the Gaza Strip, which seemingly no one's talking about yet because all eyes are in Rafah, but Israel is always saying we're going to deal with Rafah and with the central camps. And the reason is that this is Hamas's organized fighting units like an army. So one of the things that Hamas has been able to do over the years, because it has governed the Gaza Strip effectively since 2007, and Israel has not done a lot to stop it, Hamas has developed a very, very well-oiled machine of governing the population with the strength of force, but also with a civil administration. And one of the things that have happened is every time there's been a round of escalations, and Israel invaded the Gaza Strip already in 2009 and in 2014, and there's been multiple rounds of escalations with airstrikes and things like that over the years. Every time what happens is Gaza is left in some degree of ruin, nothing like what we're seeing now, but some degree of ruin. And then Hamas's well-oiled army comes out, reestablishes control, reestablishes the civil administration, and allows the movement to capitalize on this destruction, saying, do you see how evil Israel is? This is why you now must join us. This is why we must fight Israel. So the idea of, if you destroy the battalions, it doesn't mean you've killed every Hamas operative, but what you have done is you've destroyed the ability of Hamas to come back to life. You've destroyed the ability of Hamas as an organization as it was to return and re-govern. Almost like what was not done, if you want to take a comparison, with the Taliban. Right? With the Taliban, they were deposed from ruling Afghanistan, but the fact that they were able to maintain a lot of their strength and rebuild over time, but 20 years later, they didn't just come back like any random organization. They came back already knowing how to govern. They came back with well-established battalions, if you will, to know how to take over a country. So that is the interest and the importance that Israel is seeing in taking out these battalions. Not that it will kill every Hamas operative, but it will destroy their ability to come back and re-govern.
Let's bring this full circle back to the idea of how communicative is Hamas right now. We've been hearing about Yahya Sinwar being somewhere deep within the tunnels, presumably within Gaza. Is there any intel out there to suggest just how communicative Sinwar has been, whether it be with other Hamas operatives, whether it be with Hamas operatives in Qatar? Has there been any intel out there to suggest what he's been up to?
So there's a lot of speculation. I don't buy a lot of it because a lot of it just sounds outlandish. He's lost touch with reality. He's deep in the tunnels. He's gone crazy. Okay, that would be convenient if that were to happen. So I don't buy a lot of that. What we do know is that, and we know this actually from hostages who were in the tunnels, some of whom met him. We do know that he is very much in touch with reality. We do know that he is actually still organizing the Hamas defenses. And one of the things we know is that, like I said at the beginning, whether or not we understand his logic, he is the one who could make or break this war. He is the one who could decide that Hamas will go to a truce or not. Hamas external can agree to anything, but it doesn't matter. In terms of his levels of communication, we know that throughout the first months of the war, he was in full communication with the Hamas external leadership. This is done, The truth is, I don't know. I'm not a military expert on like the ways that they communicate, but it's done through couriers and a lot of other mechanisms. We do know that was happening. Then we also know that about a month ago, contact was lost with him for about 2 weeks. Now, later, it was speculated that he might have been sick. Some reports came out that he had a severe case of pneumonia, and that was the reason the contact was lost with him. But that was one of the main things that actually ended up postponing the hostage deal already 4 weeks ago, was that, again, the external Hamas leadership was saying, maybe we agree to this, maybe not. We're waiting to hear from Hamas internal because we can't actually sign off on anything without hearing from them, and they did not hear from them. Then, about 2 weeks ago, it was reported that Sinwar is back into communication, that he's back coordinating the movements and the operations. Today, there was a report in Israel that the negotiators, that is Qatar and Egypt, informed Israel that there's been some movement. That's a quote, I'm not sure what that means. But there's been some movement on the Hamas side of the negotiations, and that this movement includes the internal leadership. So there was a report specifically saying that Yahya Sinwar himself has also been communicating. We'll see in the coming days, and I'm sure we'll talk again, what that actually means.
We'll leave it there for now, Alon. Thank you as always for joining us, and we always look forward to your daily YouTube updates on the war as well. Take care. Have a good night.